MH370.
They're hiding something. Something is not right here.
Tonight on 60 Minutes. Have we been looking in the right place? The explosive new claim of a massive cover-up.
They know more than they're telling us.
And the secret report.
We have it here. Yeah.
The Malaysians don't want you to see.
I understand that there's key evidence, yes or no.
We will not brief on that detail.
You think you know the answer?
I'm confident that I know the answer.
Then find it in the southern Indian Ocean. It's now likely the search will soon be called off. Understandably, the thought of that is incredibly distressing for the families of the 239 passengers and crew who are presumed dead. But air crash investigators must also now question their own assumptions about the disaster, and more particularly must start looking at other compelling scenarios for the plane's disappearance. And incredibly, while most people are baffled by MH370, one expert says he knows exactly what happened.
You know, I hear tell this is the greatest mystery in the history of aviation. No, it's not.
You think you know the answer?
I'm confident that I know the answer, yeah.
Larry Vance is one of the world's top air crash investigators. He says there's no mystery at all to the loss of MH370. That for nearly a year, the evidence has been there all along to prove what really happened. And Malaysia knows it.
Thank you, members of the media.
Oh, absolutely. Somebody was flying the airplane at the end of its flight. Somebody was flying the airplane into the water.
Tonight, extraordinary new evidence that raises doubts about the whole premise on which the Australian-led search for the passenger jet has been based.
We will find it.
For the first time,
We have it here. Yeah.
the leaked report detailing how shortly before the doomed flight, the Malaysian captain rehearsed a route deep into the Southern Ocean. And we reveal new physical evidence from wreckage the Malaysians have so far failed to retrieve.
You're avoiding the issue. Are you saying it wasn't a controlled ditching of the aircraft?
We'll continue to analyze the data.
Is Malaysia admitting all it knows?
If you look back over the last 2.5 years and the actions of the Malaysians, it just tells me that they're hiding something. Something is not right here. I've been patient. I've given them the benefit of the doubt. For me, the gloves are off now.
At 42 minutes past midnight on the 8th of March 2014, flight MH370 flew out of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia for Beijing, China. All seemed routine. The captain, 53-year-old Zahari Ahmed Shah, a 33-year veteran with Malaysian Airlines, 18,000 hours flying experience. Malaysian investigators have declared that the behaviour of both the captain and his 27-year-old first officer before the flight did not raise any suspicions. It's in the darkness over the South China Sea, 40 minutes after takeoff, where the mystery of MH370 begins. Most on board are probably fast asleep. And if you're going to steal a passenger jet and kill everyone on board, now is the perfect time to do it. Just past 1:21 in the morning, MH370's transponder signal disappears from radar screens. Within a couple of minutes, the jet then does a tight U-turn back towards Malaysia. You've based your whole analysis on the assumption that this was an uncontrolled flight that basically found its way to the Southern Ocean for reasons that defy explanation.
Correct.
Is it possible you're wrong?
In terms of the modelling, it's highly unlikely. We're dealing with probabilities here.
Peter Foley is the Australian Transportation Safety Board manager leading the search for MH370.
In the modelling,
He admits our search is premised on the assumption that the jet was not under human control when it crashed, that it was a ghost flight.
Is there any explanation that you can offer that would explain how a modern jet like a 777 could suffer a catastrophic failure, execute a turn back to Malaysia, execute another turn up the northern extent of Malaysia, execute another turn around Penang and another turn around the northern tip of Sumatra? In order to execute a turn like that, somebody has to enter coordinates into the flight management computer, don't they?
That's correct. There is a possibility that there was someone in control at the end, and we're actively looking for evidence to support that.
This confidential analysis of Captain Zahari's home flight simulator reveals evidence the captain tried to hide by wiping his hard drive. A month before the doomed flight, Zahari plotted an almost identical route deep into the southern Indian Ocean. A simulation that clearly contemplated the jet running out of fuel over the open sea. A route that eerily mirrors the one believed to have been flown by MH370.
You don't deny the existence of that report, do you?
Absolutely exists.
We have it here.
Yeah.
Yeah. We found a flight path that leads to the southern Indian Ocean.
Correct.
The Malaysians knew early in the search that this disturbing evidence existed, but they've chosen to deny all and to exonerate their captain in their interim factual reports. But their flight simulator report that they deny even exists is a vital piece of evidence that casts doubt on the search premise that MH370 was unpiloted.
I'll tell you, as a taxpayer who's seen an enormous amount of money spent on an investigation, not least the victims, I would want to know about this report showing that the captain tracked a flight path into the southern Indian Ocean. Don't you think the public has a right to know this?
I think, as we would strongly argue, it should form a part of a final report.
What about the interim factual analysis? Why wasn't it put into the interim factual analysis?
That's a question for the Malaysians. Ross?
In a ditching, there would only be a small number of pieces, maybe the two engines.
Australia's theory, based on satellite data, is that MH370 was unpiloted at the end. But one of the world's most experienced air crash investigators disagrees. He says that MH370 was brought down by a rogue pilot.
The engines would break off. There is no other alternate theory that you can follow. Of all the potentials that might have happened, there's no other theory that fits. But if you had the engines out, how do you get the flaps down?
Larry Vance knows well what happens to an aircraft when it hits water at high speed. He led the Canadian investigation into the Swissair 111 jet crash into the Atlantic Ocean off Nova Scotia in 1998.
An airplane that goes out of control at 30,000 feet will hit the water with tremendous impact.
And this is what you saw in the Swissair.
Oh, we saw it in Swissair. We see it in other accidents. It's exploded. In Swissair, we had 2 million pieces. This airplane would have had 2 million pieces.
But an extremely high-speed descent that you'd think should have left a massive debris field like this one is what the ATSB claims its satellite data shows.
The fact is we got a bit of hard data that says the aircraft was in a rapid rate of descent. We've got a rate of descent that's between 12 and 20,000 feet a minute.
Which begs the question, where then is all that debris that Larry Vance says should have resulted from that kind of high-speed impact?
In Swissair, we had thousands of pieces of floating debris. They came up, they stayed on the surface.
Days afterwards?
Days, oh yes, absolutely, days, weeks.
A year ago, this flaperon from MH370 was found on the shores of a French island off the coast of Madagascar. It's a small but vital section of the 777's wing. It aids and enables takeoff and landing. When the jet is flying, the flaperon sits retracted into the wing. But on landing, the flaperon extends out with the flaps. What position was the flaperon in, you believe, when this aircraft went into the ocean?
I think that this flaperon shows definite evidence that it was extended. You cannot get the flaperon to extend any other way than if somebody extends it. Somebody would have to select it.
So the only plausible scenario, you believe, is that at the end of that 7-hour lonely flight into the depths of the Indian Ocean, someone activated the flaperon.
Absolutely.
And the most likely reason for that, says Larry, is a controlled ditching, which explains why there was no floating debris from the massive aircraft. A slow landing, leaving the fuselage mostly intact.
I mean, if a flaperon can make its way to Madagascar, then a life jacket or a seat cushion can make its way to somewhere. We don't see any of that. There's nothing from inside the airplane.
Every expert on ocean currents says floating debris, especially life jackets and seat cushions, should have washed ashore by now. But they haven't.
I think that the reason that we don't see debris from inside the airplane washing up in different places around the ocean is because that debris remained in the fuselage, and the fuselage went to the bottom.
Coming up, why is Malaysia ignoring vital evidence?
If the flap was extended at the end of flight, it means, doesn't it, that there was somebody in charge of the aircraft? Absolutely.
And were these MH370's final moments?
It could actually float for a while, and then it'll start sinking.
That's next on 60 Minutes. The family of MH370's captain, Zahari Ahmed Shah, has consistently rejected the idea that he could ever have been responsible for deliberately crashing the jet into the ocean. But our investigation reveals that the only possible scenario on the evidence is that a skilled pilot did deliberately land the 777 on the water. And the strongest clue is a piece of evidence Malaysia hasn't even examined. A small piece of wing called the flaperon. Veteran crash investigator Larry Vance believes the damage to its trailing edge could only have been caused by the force of water as it was crash-landed by a pilot.
The momentum of that, dragging that little flaperon through the water, would be absolutely enormous. The force of the water is really the only thing that could make that jagged edge that we see. It wasn't broken off. If it was broken off, it would be a clean break. You couldn't even break that thing. I know from experience that it's wide. If you wanted to break that off, you couldn't do it and make it look like that. That had to be eroded away.
If you have a hard time understanding how water could cut through a solid wing, take a look at this. Centimetres of solid metal cut like butter with nothing more than compressed water.
Today, that 2-metre component was boxed up and flown to France to be studied further.
Would you, if you were in charge of the investigation, have wanted that flaperon in Australia?
Absolutely. No doubt about it.
The ATSB's Peter Foley leads Australia's search for MH370. a search dependent on Malaysia's cooperation and honesty.
To read out the joint statement, please.
Why on earth have the French got this flaperon? And why isn't it with you guys, who are, after all, helping the Malaysians with the investigation?
It's a hard one, and perhaps one you should put to the French judicial authorities.
The investigation team have briefed us.
Incredibly, a year on from when the flaperon was discovered, Malaysia's Transport Minister admits his investigators still haven't been able to take possession of it.
Request. So we are unable to get the details from the French government.
That's extraordinary, Minister. 1 year on from when that flaperon was recovered, you're telling us that you haven't received any information from the French?
No, this is under the ICUR investigation team.
Can I just check this, sir? You're avoiding the issue. Are you saying it wasn't a controlled ditching of the aircraft?
At the moment, we don't have any evidence to confirm that is controlled ditching.
Please. Can you tell us, sir, simply, have you been briefed on whether the flaperon indicates a controlled ditching? Yes or no?
That's not. We did not. We were not briefed on that details.
Ministers, if you will allow me, please, ladies and gentlemen.
The Malaysians shut down our questions.
And we were trying to get an answer.
I understand your concerns, sir. I think, Minister.
I think it's been a frustration for the investigation.
It's now becoming clear that the damage to the flaperon does indicate a controlled ditching, which means there was very likely a pilot guiding the aircraft to the very end. This would cut across all the assumptions made in the search, as the ATSB's Peter Foley now admits for the first time.
We have also seen some analysis from the French that suggests that it's a possibility that it was in a deployed state.
Doesn't the visual evidence on the flaperon suggest that the flaperon was extended?
Yes.
And in a further stunning admission, Peter Foley concedes that if the plane was piloted, we may be looking in the wrong place.
If there was a rogue pilot, it's possible, isn't it, that the plane was taken outside of the parameters of the existing search area?
Yeah, if you glided the plane or indeed controlled ditched the plane, it has an extended range potentially.
When the flaperon was found, then everybody should then have concluded, in my opinion, that this was a human engineered event.
There's no other explanation.
There's no other explanation.
And now, even more evidence to support the rogue pilot theory. A wing flap found on the coast of Tanzania and brought to Australia by the ATSB after Malaysia failed to recover it.
I notice on the photographs of that flap there is the similar erosion on the trailing edge of the flap to what we also saw on the flaperon.
Correct. And we are looking to see whether or not we can work out whether that flap was extended at the end of flight. So in a sense, your premise is right. I mean, we want to understand whether if we find that flap was extended at the end of flight, it suggests a different end of flight scenario.
If the flap was extended at the end of flight, it means, doesn't it, that there was somebody in charge of the aircraft?
Absolutely.
The data recovered from Captain Zahari's private flight simulator shows he simulated a route to the furthest reaches of the Southern Ocean. The physical evidence from the recovered wing parts suggests whoever was piloting the jet tried to keep it intact in a controlled ditching on water.
Okay, Bruce, take us down.
Okay, now...
So we're right out over the ocean now. You can see the waves. You're at 2,000 feet.
Let's turn a little bit away. There's an island over there.
Bruce Margolis is a senior 777 pilot and instructor.
All right, I'm slowing down and we're going to start extending the flaps.
We're at 1,500 feet.
That's right. Our rate of descent's 2,000 feet a minute.
I cannot believe what we're about to do.
In this 777 simulator, we asked him to try to land the jet on water and to keep it as intact as possible.
1,000 feet.
Oh.
What's going to hit first?
Probably the engines. The engines are going to hit first and they'll be ripped off.
And it's going to be a massive whack, is it?
The noise will be too terrible.
Is it hard to control the aircraft?
No, it's very easy to control the airplane. You can virtually hands off.
Okay, this is it, Bruce. 100 feet, we're going in.
It's a horrible feeling. It's not easy to do.
Oh.
It's going probably into what they call ground effect.
I don't know about you, I find this very emotional, don't you?
Bang, that's it, in the water.
If you've been able to land with as little impact as possible, the engines are ripped off.
Engines are ripped off.
But there's a good chance the fuselage is largely intact, isn't it?
It's possible. Very possible that.
It's going to fill with water and sink to the bottom.
Not necessarily immediately. It may, if it's still in one piece, it could actually float for a while, and then it'll start sinking.
Do you think that plane is still largely intact somewhere on the bottom of the Indian Ocean?
I think that the fuselage certainly is intact. I think that the airplane is in big pieces for the most part, and is somewhere on the bottom of the Indian Ocean. Absolutely, it is.
There is the possibility that this plane was taken into the southern Indian Ocean by a suicidal pilot. What do you fear most about that scenario?
I fear that they were all still alive and trying to get in there, and they knew it was going on, that they became aware of it, and that they were trying everything in their power to change the situation.
The last 28 months have been an ordeal for Danica Weeks and her boys, Lincoln and Jack. As it looks more likely that her husband Paul was the victim of a calculated mass murder, a conversation she had with the Malaysian Prime Minister's wife just a month after the tragedy has taken on a chilling significance.
What did you say to her?
I said, find my husband. You need to find my husband. What are you doing? You need to do everything in your power to bring him home to us.
What did she say to you?
She told me that it was very horrible that someone would do this to 238 innocent people. She was insinuating the pilot took the plane.
It now seems likely that MH370 may never be found. That is surely tragedy enough and heartbreak to those left behind. That this tragedy may be compounded by, at the least, incompetence by the Malaysian authorities and, at worst, a possible cover-up is surely unforgivable.
How important is it for your little boys that one day you can give them an answer about what happened to their dad?
That's extremely important. They deserve to know what happened to their father, not this never-ending aviation mystery of all time. It's their dad. And for Paul, for Lincoln and for Jack, I will keep fighting to do that and to give them the truth and the answer they deserve. We all deserve.